Welcome, school directors, to this May's Ledge Rep Network meeting. It's noon, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Got a small group of folks joining today, but today's session will be recorded, and so folks will have the benefit of learning with and from all of you as we dig into the topic, most specifically of material supplies and operating costs, as you all requested last time we met in April. My name is Marissa Rathbone. I'm your Director of Strategic Advocacy, and we've got a couple components for today's Ledge Rep Network meeting. I'm going to give you a preview of a pretty comprehensive document on school finance that we recently released and posted to our website. Then our very own Daniel Lunghofer is going to walk through what the heck is an MSOC. Are SOCs involved or not? I'm not sure. And then he will also be joined with Gavin Hotman, who's with ESD 112, also an MSOC and business officer expert. And then I'll close with just some thinking around what legislative priorities might be for the 2025 session, recognizing that you all get to decide that based on our member adopted prioritization process. But there are some other education stakeholder groups already working on their priorities, and I wanted you to have a sneak preview of what they're working on as it might inform your thinking around WSSDA's legislative priorities. So with that, I'm going to first take you to the WSSDA website, show you this great new tool that we've been working closely with the contractor to build around a school finance FAQ. This FAQ was designed for the purpose really of the Ledge Rep audience. So folks who are coming into their school board role, perhaps with maybe not a super deep level of knowledge on how schools are financed and funded in the state of Washington. And maybe you do have some deep knowledge in some areas, but need a little refreshing in others. So the resource that we had our contractor put together is really aimed at a high level understanding for how is the public education school funded in Washington state. This tool also hopefully will be really helpful to you all as you are communicating your district and WSSDA as an organization's priorities going into the next legislative session, and then I assume every session beyond, as our consistent ask has been for additional ample resources for our public education system. I'm going to go ahead and take you to the WSSDA website, navigate you through how you can find this document to download on your own. So hoping that you see WSSDA's webpage here on the screen. What you would do is if you go to the home page, you're going to immediately navigate over to the newsroom, and then the subgroup at the very bottom called publications is where there are many really great resources posted. I would encourage you to review all of them. At some point in time, they will be useful to you. Open public meetings, the basics of school law, avoiding conflict of interest. I mean, do you tell your friends and family that you're into all this stuff? Because, I mean, they would be impressed, right? But want to focus right now on public school funding FAQ. So this is the document that we just posted to the website late last week. You would download the PDF, so you could actually download it, save it to your desktop, and then print it for your own. And of course, the website's going to be a little bugger for me. Let me see if I can get it here on my desktop, so it's just a little bit easier for you to see. I'm going to stop share and then pull up that PDF. Just want to walk you through some of the key elements, what's on there, just so you know what you're getting into before you dive in. Okay. So you would be able to download this onto your computer as a PDF, and then you could print it from anywhere. We will likely have paper copies of this available at annual conference later on this year, and maybe sometime earlier than that. But in the meantime, it's available for you to print on your own. And there were quite a few expert school finance individuals who were consulted in the development of this, including Daniel Longhofer, so who you will be hearing from shortly, one of our esteemed members of the WSSDA staff, whose focus is on accounting and school finance. So excited to hear from him. In the meantime, just wanted to let you know what's in here, what's in the FAQ document includes a general overview of Washington schools funding, just the basics, and then digs into the different types of funding allocation models, because there are several, if not many, that include prototypical school funding model, the school construction and assistance program, fondly known as SCAP, levies, LEA or local effort assistance, also regionalization and experience factor implications for our schools, funding for special education. And then there's sort of this miscellaneous section on a variety of other issues that do impact school finance that came up in some of the groups that we were surveying. What do you need to know in a high level overview of Washington school finance? So that includes some answers to questions such as what's the role of property taxes? What efforts are being made to reform or improve education funding? How does a resource-based formula work? How can local communities raise extra money for their schools and so on? What's neat about this is that it is not text heavy. So the goal here was to make complex issues like school finance easier to understand. Typically there's a prompt or a question and then an answer to that question with some links to additional resources should you or any other reader want to do a deeper dive. So in some places there's more text than others, but then in quite a few places there are actually images and graphics to help explain the concept in another way. And we hope all of this will be useful to you and to the people that you serve. Might also be helpful to share with your community members who may be asking you questions about how do you get money for schools and how are you spending it? And why are we short? Because we're all experiencing that. This might help lead to a more comprehensive answer to that question. So just wanted you to get a sneak preview of this. It's a great resource. I hope you will download this, share it with your fellow school directors, dig into the sections that are most important to you right now, and then let us know how it's going. How are you using this resource? Is it helpful? What's missing? Our resources don't have to be static. We can always update and add to as the need presents itself. And certainly that will be the case because as it relates to school funding, things are ever changing. So anyway, just wanted you to get a chance to see that and where you can find it. And there it is. I'm going to go ahead and just check the chat, see if folks are sharing anything. All right, I see somebody wants me to get rid of one of the Fireflies bots, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it, but some other folks might want it. And because this is a recorded LedRep Network meeting, it's okay to have the AI autopilots in here. That's certainly fine. Although, like I said before, this will be a recorded session, and so you will be able to see it again and even clip certain sections of it that might be most useful if you wanted to share. So thanks again for being here. I know it's the lunch hour. Wanted to show you a fun new resource, fun as we all might define it. We've got a funny sense of fun, don't we? But now I'd like to pass the microphone and the video to my colleague, Daniel Longhofer. We are so lucky at WSSDA to have him on our staff. While his title is accountant, he wears many hats with us.
Isn't that good?
Including the budget and finance expertise that he brings to this work and helps me during lunch session analyze these complex bills that come our way as they relate to school funding. So really grateful for you, Daniel. Thanks for sharing your expertise always, and for today, giving a little bit of a preview on what the heck is MSOX anyway. Would you, Daniel, like for me to drive the screen, or would you like to drive the screen?
You can drive the screen, that's fine.
Okay.
And I think she's bringing it up. So as she's bringing it up, as she said, my name's Daniel Longhofer. I've been in schools in the finance side for 18 years now, starting to get to the point where I have to say more years than I care to admit. I've been here at WSSDA for 4 years and that I can share my knowledge with the rest of the WSSDA team and with you out there. Um, as she's bringing it up,
It's
because I still
rich.
don't see it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you know, while she's bringing it up, one thing WASDA staff know me for is that I love trivia contests. I love trivia questions. So here's one that I will answer at the end of my presentation. What album holds the record for the most number of weeks, not necessarily consecutive, on Billboard's Top 200 with 990? So obviously it's an album that's been around for a while. So slideshow. Okay. So so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And okay, there we go. Okay, so this is just kind of a high level material supplies and operating costs. I almost called it a 14ers view. So what are MSOCs? That's the acronym. It's material supplies and operating costs. Previously, prior to the new prototypical funding formula, they were called non-employee related costs, or NERTs. Some people still use the term NERT, but generally people have switched over to the MSOC term. Um, they're used for things rather than people. So staplers, food, gas for your buses, utilities, paper, so other supplies, things like that. That's what MSOCs are. And they are considered to be part of the program of basic education, meaning the legislature can't cut MSOC funding without basically cutting basic education funding. Next slide. Okay, so how are MSOCs determined? So they are allocated on a per student basis. So every basic education student, FTE generates a certain amount of funding. Students in high schools, so grades 9 through 12, generate an additional funding amount. Students in career and technical education programs and students in skill center programs generate their own funding amounts as well. The funding rates are set in the budget. There's also now there's a legislative floor that says this is what the funding rate will be, and then we'll increase it by inflation. But the actual funding rates for any given school year are set in the budget. Next slide. So what is funded? So basic education MSOC funding falls into 8 categories, and the total amount there's $1,533.02. That'll be for the upcoming 24-25 school year. So the categories are technology, utilities and insurance, curriculum and textbooks, other supplies, library materials, professional development, material facilities maintenance, and then security and central office administration. Next slide. So high school students get funding get additional funding in the 5 categories shown there: technology, curriculum, textbooks, other supplies, library materials, and instructional professional development. And then CTE students, so the career and technical education students and skill center students, are funded with a flat amount. It's $1,757.39. So it's not really broken out into the 8 categories, but it's easy enough if you want to get an idea of what the funding rate would be. Just do the math and calculate the ratios. Next slide. So annual changes, like I said, MSOC allocations are generally increased by inflation, and the legislature sets the inflation amount in the annual budget. The general basket of funded items has not changed since the McCleary solution and fix, and it's actually been pretty consistent even since the implementation of the prototypical school model way back from old House Bill 2776. Set your Wayback Machines there. The only difference really has been that library and other materials used to be combined into one line item. Now they're split into 2. Didn't impact anything. So next slide. So some other recent changes in the 22-23 budget, they added $25 to the basic education technology MSOC allocation line item increase. So in addition to the inflationary increase of whatever that rate was for that year, they added $25 to account for that. Now, the budget, one thing about the budget is you can't set law in the budget. So that was just kind of a temporary increase that the legislature could have clawed back at any time that they wanted to. In the 24 session, Engrossed Substitute House Bill 2494 codified that increase to the technology line item. So now that additional $25 is locked in the definition of MSOCs as part of the definition of basic education. So they can't just say, oh, well, we don't want to pay that extra $25 anymore. It's in there, it's law, it's set unless they change it with another law. Then added some items, utilities and insurance, instructional professional development, security and central administration. So it's one of the first times that they've done actual increases to line items outside of just inflationary increases. Next line. Next slide. It also added this language of the increased allocation amount of $21 per annual average full-time provided under this subsection is intended to address growing costs in the enumerated categories and may not be expended for any other purpose. And so everyone did a great job of advocating and saying, we're underfunded in these areas, we need more funding. So the legislature said, okay, fine, here's more funding. You can only spend it in these areas, which, for most districts won't be a problem. But it's just language that they've added for the first time that dedicates any portion of MSOCs to being intended for those specific areas. Next slide. So funding gap for the 22-23 school year. So basic education, total allocation for MSOCs was rounded $380 million. Spending, and I'm going to qualify this. This was kind of a down and dirty calculation. Some districts may calculate exactly what they consider MSOC slightly different than what I did because I excluded a few items. But as a general guideline, so the state allocated $1,380,000,000. Districts spent $1,762,000,000. So the shortfall is there. It's $383 million of shortfall in funding for MSOCs. Career and technical education programs technically have an excess of 16 million. The downside is that the current account code structure that districts use in the accounting rules doesn't fully allow for all MSOC costs to be recorded in CTE programs effectively. So that number is probably a little bit off. And then skill centers have a shortfall of about $8 million. Next slide. So another thing about a funding gap, since statewide $380 million, is as part of your budget process and your budget adoption process, you either must disclose the projected shortfall in MSOC funding versus your budgeted expenditures, or in the case of a few districts where you actually are going to spend less on MSOCs than you're allocated for, you have to disclose how any funding not used for MSOCs will improve student achievements. And your business office is aware of those requirements, and they can help answer any questions that you might have in that area. Okay, next slide. One other item to bring up of note on MSOCs and funding gap. So special education programs, they receive a flat dollar allocation. There's no breakdown between supplies, material supplies and operating costs, salaries, benefits, none of that. It's just here, it's flat dollar amount, here you go. So it's hard to say what any shortfall would be for MSOCs in special education programs just because that number isn't available for funding. And then also the LAP program, highly capable and transitional bilingual programs, they do not receive MSOC allocations. All that your district receives on those is salaries and benefits for teachers. And combined, those programs spent $38 million on MSOCs in 22-23. And that number was not included in that $380 million. So if you add that together, now you're up over $400 million as a shortfall for MSOC statewide. And again, doesn't count special education. And that's kind of my high level. Are there any questions in chat or anything?
Really appreciate your expertise, Daniel, and as well as not just your policy expertise, but also the state level insight. I know a lot of the folks who are on the line today have challenges and issues with their own district and are thinking about numbers in terms of their own district needs, which is good. That's that, but advocacy at both levels is going to be important for us as we're going into the next legislative session for us to be telling both stories. What are the gaps at the local level as well as at the state level? And everywhere in between. So maybe as you're thinking about questions for Daniel, this might be a great opportunity for Gavin to actually step in. He's representing ESD 12 and even a little bit closer to working directly with school districts and a new friend to us. So thanks for being here, Gavin. Appreciate you taking the time to present to our ledge reps who are also school directors across the state. They're probably eating lunch or driving or working or doing something, so we don't get to see their live faces, but they are here and hope that those of you who are listening and able to ask some questions of our presenters, that would make it a valuable use of their time. So Gavin, I do have your PowerPoint presentation. Why don't I go ahead and bring it up and you can share some of the perspective you wanted to offer. Anything else you want to say just to kind of introduce yourself, where you're from and what you do and who you work with, etc.
Sure. So Gavin Hopman, I work with ESD 112 out of Vancouver, Washington. My role there is the CFO, Assistant Superintendent, and I've been at ESD 112 for 25 years. So I think what I can probably do here is, be supplemental to what Daniel just went over with you as far as those key figures. So I want to just I'll try to focus more on like from a school district perspective, especially experiences that I'm seeing as I work with supporting school districts across Southwest Washington and some districts across the state. Really, Daniel already covered this, really just what is MSOCs. We used to call them NERCs. It's really that non-employee side of our cost expenses. So you can see this sort of this list that there. But really, and this ties right back to what Daniel was just talking about is, the calculations that we come up with when we look at last year, heading into this year, regardless of what you're excluding or including, as far as trying to break it down, what I think we all collectively that really dig into the numbers can say is we feel like that number is in excess of $300 million as we started this year. And we also know that we have inflation in so many different areas is still exceeding the market costs we have for these items, these costs, or continue to surpass that funding level. Even with the $21 that was additional funding above the standard inflationary increase, which our inflationary increase at 1.9% IPD, compared to what we're seeing in cost, really isn't going as far as it needs to go. The other thing is as we deal with salary and benefits too, is when you create that surplus, when you have such a big number that's unfunded, any inflationary increase it just continues to compound itself, meaning if the state's underfunding by $300 million, now the district has to pick up the inflation on that full amount of that, in excess of 300 million, or what Daniel was sharing was the 382 million, I think it was. And the calculations about, like we're talking about, we look at what can we exclude, like extracurricular, are you going to leave that in or not? But I mean, I think all of our numbers are really close as far as where we see that gap. Maybe just back that side a little bit. I did want to talk about what's on the cost side, what is probably the biggest driver, at least on a percentage basis, and it's really in big dollar terms too, is insurance costs. I just put that number in there. It's 28% is what the average increase in insurance premiums were this year. That an area right now, the shortfall just in insurance, but the cost of actual insurance premium versus the dollars that are allocated in insurance, because insurance and utilities are combined. But as we try to break them out, it's about a $74 million shortfall in the current year that's not funded as far as what the actual cost of insurance is versus what the state funding that helps offset that. So that's a big area, and that number, I think since 2020, that number has grown by almost 60% as far as the premium increase, where revenues to offset is just under 11%. So you're looking at, almost a multiple of 6 times where cost is exceeding, new funding. And then I just want to make a quick point too about where I see, in looking in districts, working with districts' budgets, a big problem we're seeing is that, districts don't have, any other form of capacity. The levies are already capped out or, spoken for. I mean, those dollars are tied up. There's no additional dollars to go to cover these MSOC increases that are exceeding state, the state revenue. So it's leaving districts, even when you're looking at MSOCs, what do you cut? And you start getting into like in MSOCs, you're not gonna be able to cut utilities very much. I just talked about insurance, you can't cut that. I mean, you're not gonna be able to probably cut much of your software, as far as your student system, your fiscal systems, as far as your ERP. A lot of these costs that are fixed, that are in your MSOCs they're not very flexible, they're pretty fixed. So then you get into your variable cost, and what you get into there is like, you get forced into looking at, do I have to cut curriculum? Do I cut computers to students? Do I cut, slash my technology and my building budgets? Because that's sort of what we're forced to really look at when there's just not enough dollars to cover. And then I just wanted to share a little bit, and this ties into what Daniel was talking about too, is when I look at MSOCs, I don't really see that the money we're getting in basic ed, when I'm talking about basic ed, I'm really eyeing in on program 01 and program 97, our general operating account in 97, and then where most of basic ed sits, which is program 01. You can't use, when we talk about MSOCs in CTE, food service, transportation, even if we did you can't move that revenue can't be used to offset your costs in program 01 and 97. CTE allocation is required to, all but 5% is being required to spend in CTE. So when I look at really the biggest impacts on MSOCs, I'm really looking at, the funding coming into basic ed and the expenses going out. Next slide. This is just a breakdown of just where the allocations were 23, 20, and these are those 8 categories. In that bottom half, you can see that there's an enhancement for high school. This is the basic ed side. This doesn't tie to the CTE side, but that first line you see where it says total MSOCs per student FTE, that's the allocation that's out there, and I had 22, 23, 24 our current year, before it was enhanced a little bit during the current session, and then what 24, 25 is. And just to sort of maybe highlight something, if we go into like the couple lines down when you get in utilities insurance, you can see next year's at $438. I was in a district this morning that number is over $1,200 is what the real cost is. So their insurance premium for their district, when you break it down on a per student basis, what they were quoted for next year, plus what their current utility spend is, that district where it says $438, that number is over $1,200 in actual costs. So, and you see that they're only being allocated at the base MSOC of $1,533, which is a couple lines up. So almost all of their state allocations just going to fund, and that the district I'm talking about, for that specific district, it's almost all going to utilities insurance. So all the rest of the areas here, there's really very little dollars that are available, and a lot of these other areas have fixed costs to them. So, I mean, I think when we're looking at the bigger picture, It's impacting, just every district probably a little bit differently. Also, I put in the small school MSOC on the bottom. So our really small, not tiny, but our really small districts, these are districts that are, that have they are eligible for small school factors. And where you see most of the districts at the very bottom, where you see that 13,729, that's for your districts that, when you have under a 270 high school students, you could potentially get a little bit of that funding. But for the most part, most of that funding goes to the districts that are, have 100 students or less in their high school, where that's significant. But when we look at what that revenue generates with their FTE compared to the increases I'm talking about we've seen in MSOC costs, I would say everybody's being impacted, and we're seeing definitely a significant, I'd say even overall, a slightly higher impact on a lot of the small districts. Is there any questions, comments?
Thank you for that perspective,
Sure.
Gavin. That's it's always important that we acknowledge our small schools, which actually comprise the majority of our district statewide. So sometimes when we think small schools, we think that people tend to think, oh, that's just a handful of schools. Well, it's actually in the hundreds. So appreciate you bringing all of this to our attention, including that. I'm going to go ahead and stop share. Hopefully that'll put a little heat on our participants to come forward with some questions. I also put in chat in case they're not able to turn their screen on and ask. But anybody have questions for our MSOC experts today, state level, district level, that you'd like to ask? Great. So Jen Herman asked a question for both of you. Really be interested in both of your perspectives on how to effectively advocate for an increase to MSOC with the legislature. Have you seen anything be successful? What's the kind of messaging, and what are some of the numbers that we might think about using?
I can jump in. Working with the districts in Southwest Washington, we're currently right now collecting 23-24 data in MSOCs from our districts, because we know that we're not going to get to we have access to year-end data until probably just, late November, December, which that's pretty late in order to really be, to make sure that we're really ahead of the start of the legislative session to get the right data out. So I think looking at, for individual districts, really being able to tell their story of where they're at now and what that looks like into next year's budget. And I think that's really important from a regional and a statewide perspective. So I think the data is really important. I also think that every individual district has a story to tell with this, as far as, like I was talking about. I mean, I was at the district I was talking about that I went to this morning. What is the impacts of the fact that you're using almost all your MSOC money just to fund your utilities and insurance bill? So what's your impact? How's that impacting curriculum? How's that impacting a lot of the key things, or as far as MSOC area costs that is really essential for student learning? I think that's a big area, is just to really be able to talk about impacts.
Agree with what Gavin said. Your individual district, you should be able to get your end of year 23-24 numbers, in October to mid-November, because the financials are due to the state in mid-November. So that's when you will have access to your individual numbers and can start crafting your message. The statewide numbers, won't be available usually till mid-December, because they have to take it all and compile it. But what I would consider doing is, start looking at, okay, asking how much are our costs increasing, and what did we have to cut to be able to afford these things that we can't, go without. We can't go without insurance. We can't go without electricity. So what did we have to cut to be able to keep our insurance and keep the lights on?
Great advice, both of you. I would also add that don't assume that our legislators know what MSOC is. We have so many acronyms in the education space alone, but then legislators also work in healthcare and other public service entities. They all have their own sets of acronyms. So please be ready to explain what MSOC is, and don't assume that they'll understand then why it's so important. But I really love the framing that Gavin talks about. It's not an area that can be cut. It literally is keeping the lights on and the bills paid, which, if you're looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of education funding, MSOC's really foundational, just to be able to again have electricity, heat, and the function of the buildings where we serve students. So being able to put it simply like that so that they understand how important it is. When we're thinking about, Gavin and I were talking about this when we were brainstorming delivering this presentation, is if you're just thinking about from a personal level in your own life, what are the things that you cut first? Well, you're not cutting electricity, you're not cutting other essentials, food, that kind of thing. So you might have to cut your cable, you might have to cut some streaming services, you might have to cut a Target adventure, but the basic needs you have to keep going in order for students and staff to be taken care of while they're there. I think that Darcy Huffman has a question or comment. Darcy, jump in.
I do. Thank you very much. Thanks, Marissa, for putting this together. This is really interesting. And I have a whole list of questions now to ask poor Kate. It's not like she's doing enough already. But one of the things that I want to point out, and one of the things that I'm working on, are candidates. So we talk about talking to our legislators that we have now, but we have lots of candidates out there. We have lots of new people running for office, including including our governor. I mean, we have 3, 4 governor candidates, and I think it's important that we hold their their feet to the fire and talk about school funding while we're doing this. And if you have an opportunity to really sit down with one of the candidates and talk to them about what school funding is about, it's a great opportunity to make that connection if they are elected, and they kind of go in knowing at least a little bit about school funding, because it's an important part, and lots of candidates don't think about figuring out about school funding until they're in the legislature, and then they go, oh crap, I should have paid more attention to school funding. Just a thought.
Really great points, Darcy. Thank you. Daniel, Gavin, any thoughts in response to that?
I just want to say, I would, if you can start talking to the candidates now, might be a good, good to start building those relationships. So if they do win, you've already started to build the relationship. Just be prepared that they may not have any experience, so they may not, have any background of what the school funding, is or has been, or what the legislative changes have been, so, but your incumbents, obviously, they'll know that, and they'll have at least, a marginally better knowledge, if not hopefully a much greater knowledge. But just be aware that your incoming candidates, your challengers, they may not have that knowledge, so you'd have to do a lot of, explaining of the basics and the fundamentals to them.
Yeah, that's great. It's a good point. And my hope is that the school finance FAQ document that I shared first and is also provided in the meeting chat might serve as a foundation for the conversation. The very beginning of that document just talks about budget basics for school finance. And that might be as advanced as you need to get for your very first conversation with candidates. And that's okay. It's a starting point. If they see you as a resource, they will absolutely have the opportunity in the future to think about school finance more. And if you position yourself as a resource in that area, they'll remember you and seek you out to dig deeper on those issues. So again, that document is pretty long. It's 32 pages, but just the first couple pages alone might be a nice starting point for conversation, even something you can hand them and walk away with your contact information. So highly recommend that as a starting point for y'all. I think I saw Mike Skagen have his screen on, and Mike, I know you sent me some some numbers from your own district. Did you want me to share those, or did you have any questions or comments you wanted to include? Might have lost him for a moment. Okay, anybody else have questions, comments about MSOC or what you're experiencing at your own district level? Or any conversations you've actually had with legislators about the issue and what the receptivity is?
I'm back, Marissa. Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah, go ahead and pop in.
Well, I'm really glad that you took this subject up because it was kind of one of my suggestions at our last meeting. And I'm glad you got my emails yesterday because we're just a perfect example of what every district is going through. And if you look at our numbers, they're brutal. And the fact that we got a whole whopping $29,000 in additional funding this last year with our $21 per student, that's like, I don't know, slap in the face sort of for what we're actually going through. And again, talk about educating our legislators and the new ones that are coming in that have no clue how much our insurance costs are. Well, this is good. So I'd be happy to have you share some of our numbers because it is really interesting and telling, to be honest with you. So just go through our typical MSOC expenses or revenue versus expenses for the last several years. Good example, well, of course, 2021 is your anomaly, but every district is struggling. This is not new to any school board director. We're fighting this every day. And it's no wonder we're all have $1 million, $2 million budget shortfalls with our insurance costs and lights, utilities, and we can't keep up, to be honest with you, Marissa. You know as well as I do. It's really tough out there. But yeah, share. I sent you some more numbers on an email too. I wouldn't mind you sharing that too.
Let's see if I can pull that up. Just give me one moment.
That was a screenshot you had, which was a lot easier to get. But I think I
found it, so it's out in the context of an email, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull that up. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, so just scroll down and you just let everybody see what a 1,400 student district looks like and how much we're underfunded every year. It's a really good depiction of your typical small school. And it is literally an uphill battle to survive. And something needs to be done. I was really go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, have you recently had any conversations with your legislators about this, shared these numbers? Is it catching? Are they even interested? Did they say they fixed it in the last session with that $21 increase?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're embarrassed, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be perfectly honest. And we did share this with our local reps, and it's pretty telling. Don't you agree? This is really a good indication. And I know every one of the board directors that are on this call today and all their colleagues, they're struggling with the same numbers.
Mm-hmm. And
something needs to be done. And it needs to be done quickly. Otherwise, our kids' education is being impacted drastically.
Yeah. Do you mind if I segue from there, Mike, or is there anything else you wanted to share?
That's it. I really appreciate the fact that you shared this.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Thanks for getting it all prepared too. That means as a result of our conversation, you also reached out to your CFO and they were able to crunch some numbers. These are the types of numbers, y'all, that you should have on the ready going into the legislative session, because they will be asked. We will be asked to prove it. And by having numbers that are as current as possible leading up to the legislative session, the better. But again, I would reiterate, please do not wait to communicate these numbers to your legislators until the legislative session. I recognize it's an election year, as we all will be suffering together through for the next 8 months. But keeping in mind that many of our legislators, even if they're running a campaign and they have someone contesting their race, they may still end up in the seat again. And certainly talking with candidates is also important. So it's a little bit of double duty. You're talking to the folks who are running, who are currently seated or who may end up in the seats, so that legislators are going into session with some level of knowledge that this is a problem. They might not understand all the details. They might need to come back to you to ask more questions. But when you say MSOC is a problem and here's why, and put some things right out in front of them, it won't be a surprise to them when leg session comes up. I think I might have a question just going to pop back in. So Lisa asked the question, can we get a bulleted list of the items Mike asked his district for so we can do our homework and get the info from our business managers? That's a great ask, Lisa. Thank you. So Mike, if you wouldn't mind either telling us or sharing with us via email, what was the conversation that led to the email that we were just looking at with all the numbers? Did you send an email to your CFO? Did you have a conversation? What were the kinds of things you asked for in order to yield that information? Would be super helpful.
Well, these are questions that we always ask of our CFO every month when we have our school board meetings. That's part of our the summary that we receive. And so I could send, Marissa, I could send you an email that
Great.
That generated this particular, all these bullet points. And I think everybody, there's like 5 or 6 bullet points that I think everybody should know exactly where they stand in every district. How much is our insurance? How much are our utility bills? How much are we actually getting funded? I mean, it's really telling when you see what I presented to you, Marissa, how unbelievable it really is. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. Yes. Especially when you think about it in the context as that's not all the bills.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is just one funding mechanism that we're talking about. And I think that's where it gets overwhelming for all of us and for legislators as well, because if we're just talking about the public education space, there are multiple funding streams, I think all of which are unfunded. And that's just public education. If you look at other sectors too, as folks are advocating for with their legislators, probably those sectors are underfunded in a lot of ways as well. But we're the only one that's the paramount duty, as we will consistently remind folks. For our candidates, though, they may not know yet, but boy, will they. I bet you every candidate who is going into the legislature will know that public education is the paramount duty. So just keep those talking points combined together. It's not just that it's the paramount duty, but it's what the duty needs to provide in order for us, again, at a most basic level, keep the lights on and bills paid.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, Mike. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind emailing me kind of your key questions, I can email it out to the full LegRep network. That would be super great. I'll also include as a part of that email all of the resources that I've shared today. And then I want to go through one more presentation with you all before we close, but I want to be sure to honor Daniel and Gavin's time. I don't know if they need to pop off or anything. Any other questions for our MSOC experts today? Okay, I bet you it won't be the last though. So thanks, Daniel and Gavin, for being here with us. Really appreciate your insights and expertise. We could not do this work without you. We wouldn't really want to either.
I did want to give the answer to my trivia question, though.
Of course, yes. Will you restate what the trivia question was? Because some folks popped on late.
So the trivia question is, what album holds the record for most number of weeks on the Billboard 200 chart? So the top chart with 990 non-consecutive. The answer is Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, that's not surprising. Love it. I'm a little disappointed that Sarah Betnell didn't come forward with that answer already. I feel like it was already in her brain. Probably some folks tried to Google it, but it wasn't in your brain, Sarah?
No, I was gonna say the White Album.
Well, it's probably a good guess. You know anything about the White Album there, Daniel, you can tell anybody about?
Not sure where it is on the list. I know it's not number 2. That one actually belongs to Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Nice.
I don't remember which one, but yeah. So at
I feel
best, it would
like
be 3, number 3.
if Daniel and Sarah went to a trivia contest together, forget about it, everybody. Forget about it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just share one more resource with y'all. So from my perspective, as we think about advocating, you know, numbers for some people can be boring. I know probably present company is excluded here, but sometimes it's really hard for legislators to wrap their heads around it. And so telling the story behind the numbers will be critically important. So it might be even better for you to share as a result of underfunding in MSOC, what are the consequences? Maybe you haven't replaced your math curriculum in over a decade, and therefore your students aren't successfully meeting standard at particular grade levels. Draw connections to things that legislators will care about that are really student-centered. So how are student learning outcomes impacted by the fact that you are having to make cuts in those areas that have more flexibility, quite honestly? As Gavin pointed out, you don't get to not pay the bills. So in that, you have to cover costs there, which takes away funding from other sections of the learning environment. And where are those cuts coming from, and how does that impact student learning? So framing it from what the student impact is important. Framing it from the staff impact, as in staffing cuts, as many of you are going through right now, and potentially not being able to compete with your neighboring school districts because you can't compete with salaries. So those are other ways that you could make the argument. And then, oh shoot, I had a third, but I lost it. But so while I'm thinking about it, let me go ahead and pull up this PowerPoint presentation. Some of you may have seen it, and I just want to give credit to Melissa Gombowski and Charlie Brown, who are contract lobbyists who work with many school districts directly across the state. And they have really been shepherding this concept of the big 3. And the big 3, as we think about, are the 3 primary areas for advocacy in their advocacy efforts going into the 2025 legislative session. The challenge for WSSDA is that as a state agency who is comprised of 1,477 locally elected officials, we have an official process in place by which members have the opportunity to weigh in and prioritize as a collective body. That is democracy at its finest. That also means that it takes a little bit more time than some contract lobbyists and other education stakeholder groups are able to just quickly turn around their priorities without going through multiple steps. However, I wanted to share this with you because you will get to weigh in on priorities for WSSDA in September and October of this year, which means that if you have in your mind that part of good advocacy is being advocates as part of a larger collective, to whatever degree WSSDA can show up in partnership with WASA, AWSP, WEA, sharing these priorities, we will be stronger together. And so with that, they're talking about growing the box, and the box being how much money you get right now being a bigger box of money. So we've been really narrowly focused in this conversation on MSOC, which is important. And the conversation is, how do you get the full box of school finance funding bigger so that you can cover for MSOC, you can cover for other areas, just that the box is getting bigger for school finance. The ultimate goal that they are leading is around securing $1 billion new dollars of investment in K-12 in the 2025 biennium. We know that we have Senator Wellman, if she wins her election, has already committed to putting forward an ask for $1 billion. It's a big ask. I don't anticipate we'll get all of that, but you never get what you don't ask for. And so aiming high and for what the real need is important. And hopefully we'll get as close to it as possible. The long-term goal would be to fully update the school finance to fund actual basic costs. There's some debate about what it means to fully update the school finance funding model. Do you change the model itself? Does that make it better? Or do you just more adequately fund the model that's already in place? So more to be determined as school finance experts look at models from other states and other types of modeling for school finance that might improve ours. So in 2025, we have 105 days. It's called a long session. That is the year that we ask for big funding issues because it's the first year of a biennium. The first year of the biennium is when big budget items can be set for the 2 years. We are talking as a collective about how to have message discipline. And what that means is, as you are well aware during a legislative session, there are a lot of policy issues that are coming at us and a lot of different ways to get distracted. And we all are guilty of this. And me, on behalf of you, also get pulled in a lot of different directions because we spend a lot of time, to be quite frank, on some of the controversial issues that folks get wrapped around the axle around, and we lose sight of the things that we are collectively for, where there is common ground. And this MSOC issue, as well as special education, are certainly areas where the WSSDA body, as well as our education partners, are all together on. And so if we were to have some discipline around letting go of the things that distract us and focusing on these big policy and budget items that take a huge lift, a lot of focus, and a ton of discipline to stay on point, we would be better served in serving our students within the public education system. Forwarding next slide, the 3 biggies are special education, transportation, and MSOC, according to these other groups. I will just say from the last 5 years of prioritization from WSSDA membership, special education, transportation, and amply funding basic education or amply funded staffing levels has been always in the top 5 to 10. So MSOC pretty naturally fits in there. I will also tell you there are a couple position proposals that would be coming to General Assembly to strengthen some of our position language on basic education funding to more specifically call out MSOC, as well as an additional position proposal around MSOC. So things just to be aware of and keep an eye on, but I don't feel like these 3 priorities are outside of your existing and previous interests already. There are many other district needs. We, of course, will be able to weigh in on them. We have currently 225 member adopted positions. And so during a legislative session, we can weigh in passively by just signing in support or concern about a bill, sending written communication to legislators or a committee about how we might like to see a bill improved. But we can really show up in force, providing testimony, engaging a larger swath of our membership to all be communicating the same message. So needless to say, there's different levels of advocacy engagement. And so by prioritizing and having message discipline around our priorities doesn't exclude the fact that we would weigh in on other important issues, even things such as dual credit, or I'm trying to think of other federal impact aid, were that sort of thing to come up. So we have positions on those things as well, and certainly would weigh in as appropriate and as members have adopted positions related to them. One of the ongoing priorities of this membership are capital budget, just to keep in mind that capital budget is an entirely separate funding area. So we've got the operating budget, which includes MSOC and all the other issues we were talking about. Capital budget is a different budget from the state altogether. So we will, in lockstep with our partners, continue to advocate to support increases to the school construction and assistance program, to enact a simple majority for school bonds and any other capital increases that support school districts. Getting close to time. Just wanted to remind you, we're also looking at the long game. So there are a lot of other issues that impact school districts, such as regionalization, experience factors, substitute costs, local effort assistance reform altogether, levy reform, all those things are in our collective minds. And we will continue to advocate for them or improvements within them as the opportunities allow. So just some thinking about what are some obstacles for us, not necessarily barriers, but considerations, is that the currently seated governor will have the opportunity to submit a governor's budget for the 2025 legislative session, even though in 2025 we will have a new governor. And so communicating with OSPI and the governor's office now about what our priorities is still appropriate, even though those two offices are actually up for re-election and may have different leadership at the time the legislative session begins. We also work collectively with AWSP, PTA, WASA, WASBO, all of those organizations to whatever degree can speak with one voice, to advocate with one voice. We are collectively more effective. And then some of the realities that they just wanted to lay out is this conversation around, we used to, as a public education system, get 52% of the state budget, and we are now around 42 to 43%. I have heard from some legislators that they don't like that framing. The percentiles don't really matter to them. I heard a better framing of it actually from Superintendent Reichdahl the other day that said, even if the legislature was just keeping up with the pace or cost of inflation, because of where we're at with school funding, we are actually down $1,000 per student than we were 5 years ago when we were at the 52% range. So instead of using that 52 to 43% range, saying we are down $1,000, approximately $800 to $1,000 per pupil over the last 5 years, might be a more compelling argument, because anybody would say, wow, why have we gone down in total cost per pupil? That doesn't make any kind of sense. School lawmakers still don't understand reporting issues or school finance issues, and in some cases may not trust the reporting. And so that's where relationships come in. Uniform reporting, transparency, and also just having some coffee talks with your legislators in the communities where they serve. Invite them to coffee, invite them to schools. You've heard me say this many, many times, and no time better than the present. And again, this isn't my slide deck, so I'm not going to go through all of these things, but just wanted to reiterate that that hopefully we'll be able to work together lockstep with our partners. And we've got a lot of work to do in between now and then. I'm past time. Any closing questions, thoughts, or comments? Anything that you'd like to be sure we tackle in our LegRep network meetings of the future? Just give a pause in case anybody wants closing comment, statement, question.
Marissa, I'll just say thank you very much.
You bet, Mike.
It was a good meeting. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you. You
Yeah,
really helped to draw it. Yes.
I'll second that, Marissa. And this is really that $1,000 per student is really powerful.
So powerful.
To say we're spending $1,000 less on our students now than we did 5 years ago. I mean, that's regarding inflation and that's cost. Yeah, that's a powerful number. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. It was it was compelling to me when I heard it too. Just the other day, actually, I was like, oh wow. It again, because it's a number that relates directly to students, it'll be more relatable to our legislators than just a high percentile mark on the general operating fund.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Thank you all. This will be recorded and posted to the YouTube channel. So accessible. If you just want to take clips of it to share, you're more than welcome to. I believe for the June meeting, we have some student reps who might be joining us to talk about for the 2024-25 school year, how you might best onboard your new student board reps and make sure you're authentically engaging them, but also happy to share that time with any other issues or interests that are important to y'all. Please feel free to reach out and share the resources as you can. Thank you for all you do and for being here today.